Welcome to the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast, a celebration of craft, commerce, and community. I'm your host, Matthew Felix, and I'm here today with Elizabeth Gonzalez James.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Before becoming a writer, Elizabeth was a waitress, a pollster, an Avon lady, and an opera singer. She's an alum of Breadloaf Writers Conference, Tin House Writers Workshop, and Lit Camp. Her stories and essays have appeared in the Idaho Review, the Rumpus, StorySouth, PANK, and elsewhere. And she's received numerous Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net nominations. Currently, she's a regular contributor to Ploughshares Blog. Welcome again, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So my last guest was Lily Danziger, whose memoir, Negative Space, was selected by Carmen Maria Machado as a winner of the Santa Fe Writers Project Literary Awards. And then I'm preparing for our talk today, and I didn't know this, but your book, your novel, Mona at Sea, which we're going to talk about today, was a finalist in the Santa Fe Writers Project Literary Awards. I have to look at that one because it's so long. Judged by Carmen Maria Machado. So I don't know if the Santa Fe Writers Conference, if they put something in my water, or project rather, if they put something in my water, or if I'm just incredibly in sync with them at the moment. But I just thought that was an interesting synchronicity. And I also wanted to say that no money has exchanged hands. Before we get to Mona at Sea, you were an Avon lady. Do we even still have Avon ladies?
Yes, I was an Avon lady, but it was the 90s. So I actually don't know if they still have Avon ladies, but I've been surprised how many people have asked me about that. It's really funny. Yeah, I think that it touches on some kind of nostalgia for that bygone time. But yeah, when I was a teenager, I used to go door to door.
Oh, did you actually went door to door?
Yeah. I actually went door to door because I was like 15. I didn't have a car. And I don't think 15-year-olds were buying Skin So Soft and Delta Burke perfume back then. But yeah, I used to sell it. And I think I probably made a total of $30, but it was more than I had before I started.
Hey, You know what? We do what we can. We do it. My first job, I was making 25 cents an hour for the first couple months. And then it went up by a quarter of an hour or about a quarter per hour until I was making like $2 an hour. So yeah, we do what we can, especially when we're younger. But what about opera singing? Are you formally trained? I'm also curious about that one.
That was my first official job. I sang opera at Macaroni Grill. I don't know if you've ever been to Macaroni Grill, but their whole shtick is that they have singers come up and stand on this countertop on Friday and Saturday nights and sing opera. And then when it's your birthday, the opera singers will come to your table and screech in your face. And that was my first job when I was 16. And it was so much fun. Yeah. And it's actually an experience that I was able to draw from to write one chapter of my book, which takes place in an upmarket Italian corporate concept.
Right. Do you feel like busting into an aria right now? I mean, I know you're not warmed up.
No, that's okay. But I am thinking of potentially starting a TikTok where I just like stand barefoot in my kitchen while I'm cooking and like sing random arias.
Yes.
So
We'll
see.
I think that's a great idea. And I did have one guest on my previous show, travel writer Don George, who did sing in Japanese. So I was able, sometimes it works. Maybe next time I'll give you warning and you can kind of be warmed up. And
yeah. I'm a little worried about this microphone right here. Like if I try to sing, it might just like blow everybody's ears out. So
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. That's enough about your past. Let's talk about Mona at Sea, your present, which also your past, I guess, because a lot of time and years went into this. But what is Mona at Sea about?
Yeah, it's a dark comedy set during the Great Recession. And it's about Mona Morales, who's an overachieving Latina millennial. And she graduates from college and is expecting to walk into this plum job on Wall Street. And when she gets there, she finds out the job is gone, the economy is in shambles, and she basically has to figure out what she's going to do with the rest of her life. She moves back in with her parents, with her tail tucked between her legs, and things just go down from there.
Right. And what was the inspiration for the story?
The inspiration was taken from my own life. I got an MBA in 2007, 2008, and I graduated in the winter of 2008, just a couple months after Lehman Brothers collapsed and Bear Stearns. And I tried to get a job for all of 2009, and I applied to between 300 and 400 jobs. I didn't get anything at all. I couldn't even get a receptionist job, nothing. And I got pregnant. And then I found myself staying at home as a full-time mom, unexpectedly taking care of a baby when I thought I was going to have this finance career. And writing was a way to kind of maintain my sanity during that time period. And also, this book was a way to sort out my anger and frustration about what I had just experienced. And so it was definitely, the unemployment aspect of it was definitely inspired by my own life.
Right. So tell me a little bit more about Mona. There's a slogan that comes up and that's kind of updated as we go throughout her story that kind of captures kind of the main dimensions of her life. Can you tell us that off the top of your head?
Oh, geez. I knew you were going to say that.
Okay. Do you want me? I can do it.
It was, I'm unemployed. I've never had a boyfriend. I live with my parents in the most boring town in the universe, and I hate myself.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but you came through with flying colors.
Okay, great.
So I just love that. And I love how it gets updated as her circumstances kind of change, but I think it just really summarizes kind of her disposition and her outlook. Right. And then just a couple other things that I would add is that there were interesting parts of kind of who she is she never had a best friend until she was 18, which is obviously very telling. And, but there's another line that also really resonated for me. And I think sums it up really well. And that is, quote, "Happiness and Mona go together like snails and salt." Mm-hmm. So I love that line. And that's just one of several hilarious lines. And we're going to talk about the humor. You already mentioned, it's dark humor. We're going to talk more about that. But something else, just to kind of round out our initial impressions or portrait of Mona, something else that sort of defines her or has a big impact on kind of her outlook again is, and torments her, is an incident that happens before the book takes place, but then again sort of torments her throughout, a very public incident. Can you tell us a little bit about that and its significance?
Yeah. So she gets to New York and is ready to walk into her Wall Street job. And oops, she gets there and finds out that over the weekend, the financial services firm where she was supposed to work has gone bankrupt and nobody bothered to tell her. And so when she's standing there with her suitcases in tow, just trying to piece together the fact that all of her dreams have come crashing down around her feet, this reporter shows up and shoves a microphone in her face. And she's like, "How do you feel right now?" And Mona has this completely, what's the right word? It's like overly honest meltdown.
Full disclosure. Yeah.
Full disclosure, no filter meltdown. There we go. And it's filmed and it goes viral, and she becomes the unwitting kind of spokesperson for her generation. She's dubbed the Sad Millennial.
Right.
And this is something that she has to carry with her to every job interview, every time she meets new people. Everybody's seen the video, and it's just mortifying.
Yeah. So Mona is the Sad Millennial, and there's so much. I mean, we could probably spend the whole hour talking about that whole notion of millennials and social media and how it's impacted their experience. But let's move beyond that and talk about, so Mona's a millennial. She's the Sad Millennial. You are also a millennial, even though, according to something I read that you wrote, you're a geriatric millennial.
Yes,
I read that somewhere.
I'm a
okay.
Geriatric millennial. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm way beyond your geriatricness or whatever that word would be. So let's talk about millennials, because again, Mona is a millennial. It's a main subject of this book, or defining element to this book. Have millennials gotten a bad rap?
Yeah, absolutely. They have. Millennials have inherited one economic disaster after another. And not only that, but they graduated and came of age into an economy that I think is unlike any economy we've seen in a really long time, where employers have gotten really comfortable not paying workers. They're not paying workers either by offering unpaid internships, by suppressing wages, by stripping workers of the benefits that they should be getting. So, making somebody a contract employee instead of a full-time employee so they don't have to offer health insurance, et cetera. And the whole gig economy thing where people are just meant to string together these side hustles and somehow make it work. This is no way to build a life when you're not getting paid for your talent and your time. And I really grate at the notion that millennials are entitled, that we're spending all our money on $17 plates of avocado toast. I mean, it's easy to make these jokes, but the reality is that we're a generation that's not going to do as well as our parents. Nobody has the opportunity to buy a house, build equity, save for retirement, save for our kids to go to college. It's a mess, and we've inherited this mess. And what else are we supposed to do with that? I don't even know where we go from here.
Right. And understandably then, I mean, Mona has a lot of frustration and rage as a result of these circumstances, but she didn't, like you said, she inherited, and her generation, your generation inherited these circumstances. She's sitting at one point fairly early in the book, she's sitting with her friend Ashley, and they're kind of discussing the job situation. And she says, and she's getting pretty worked up. And she says, quote, "This is just unemployment rage. It's jealousy and anxiety and fear and resentment and justified and unjustified rage at a system that once worked in my favor and now won't even let me peek over the rim of success." Because one of the big attributes that Mona has is she was extremely ambitious. She got all A's. She was playing the game. Mm-hmm. And when it came time to get what she thought she was working for, that was taken from her. And so tell me about her ambition and how that notion of playing by the rules and then having the game changed right when your moment comes.
Yeah, there's a big incentive, I think, to telling young people that you need to work hard and stay in school. And if you just do that, then everything's going to be fine. And that isn't the case. Plenty of people work hard and they never get ahead, and plenty of people stay in school and all they end up with is a lot of debt and find that they are now overqualified for some jobs or lack real world experience, whatever that is. So I think that it's one of the many lies that sits at the heart of the American dream and kind of this capitalist system that we all have to operate inside of. It is this foundation that it's up to you. Your success is up to you. All you have to do is just try hard enough. And I'm sorry, that isn't the reality that I've seen. That isn't the reality that a lot of people live. Right.
I know lots of people who are working really, really hard and still just trying to make ends meet and still trying to figure it out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of her anger, a lot of Mona's anger, therefore, is justified. She recognizes in that quote, some of it's maybe not, whatever, she's human, but a lot of it is in fact justified. That being the case, at one point she's in this group of people who are job seekers, and the leader of that group takes her to see one of her sort of self-help or personal growth idols, motivational speaker, who in the book is called Laura Horn. And this motivational speaker, she gets to talk to her face-to-face ever so briefly. And the motivational speaker tells her, quote, "The world doesn't owe you anything. Stop waiting to be rescued and take control of your life." So even though, we just talked about that notion of entitlement, at the same time, though, there is a sense that, again, she is human. And that's a big wake-up call when she hears, the world doesn't owe you anything. Stop waiting to be rescued and take control of your life. So how does that, is Mona waiting to be rescued? Does Mona feel that the world does owe her something, even if a lot of her feelings are justified about her situation?
That's a good question. And I think it's not a straightforward answer because, yes, she is a victim of the economic circumstances that were prevailing at the time. She's victim of a lot of things that are just completely out of her control. at the same time, I think that, and I don't want to give away anything, but the point of Mona's journey in this book is for her to figure out what is it even that she wants? What is she going after? And so I kind of see that quote, that advice comes too early in the book for Mona to appreciate it. I think that that is exactly what she needs to do. But when she gets that advice, she isn't able to listen to it or receive it. I think that it's correct advice, but not in the way that she thinks it is.
Right.
And maybe not even in the way that that inspirational guru intended it. But I think that nonetheless, it was exactly the thing that she needs to hear. And yeah, it's like I said, it's just difficult. We can't sit around, feeling like victims all the time, even though that is justified. At some point, you just have to feed yourself. And I don't know. I don't know. It's tricky.
Yeah.
It's a fine line.
Well, a little later on, speaking of timing, because like you said, that maybe that was a little early for her, for it to register for her. Later on, I think this is later, her dad gives her similar, slightly different, but similar advice. He says, quote, and he's going through a lot as well. He's breaking up with her mother. There's a lot going on in his life, and he's making some big changes. But he says to her, quote, don't be living for the next thing. Either be happy with what you've got or move on. So what does that mean to live for the next thing?
In his case, I think that he has spent all of his adult life making compromises and doing things that he didn't actually want to do. He reveals that his career was not necessarily the career that he wanted. And as you mentioned, he's going through a divorce, and I think his marriage has been unsatisfying for a long time. And I think he's trying to tell her that from his experience, imagining a future where you're happy is not, it's not going to be satisfying. You should imagine, you should not imagine a future, but try to cultivate a present where you're happy, rather than like, well, it's kind of like book publishing, right? Like, I think I've heard a lot of authors say, I'll be happy once my book comes out. Once I have a published book, then I know that I will have arrived and everybody will respect me and I'll respect myself, etc. Right. And my book came out 2 weeks ago and I feel exactly the same this week as I did like a month ago. And I think like waiting for the next thing, it just isn't, I don't think it's a good way to live. I think, this gets into all the mindfulness stuff, like being in the present, living intentionally, all that kind of stuff. And I think that quote kind of in some way gets at all of those things.
Another thing that you and Mona have in common, in addition to being millennials, is you're both half Mexican-American and half white. Now, not only that, but you can both pass, and often or even typically do pass as being white, not necessarily as Latina. So, and there's a great quote that really summarizes her experience here. And I want to just read this quickly. And that's, quote, our parents had one Mexican kid, my brother, and one white kid, me. Looking at a family photo, it would seem my father and mother independently butted us like Hydra. Danny growing from a lump, Danny the brother, Danny growing from a lump on our father's neck and me from our mother's. Okay. So first of all, I laughed out loud on that one. I love that line. That's another great example of some of the humor in this book. But what was interesting to me, besides that whole notion, is I read I can't remember where I read this one, but that you didn't decide to include that race angle, that part of who Mona is, until pretty late in the game. I think it was after you had your book deal, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Can you, or maybe it was when you got your book deal, around that time, I think is what I read. Regardless, why did you decide it was important for you to call that out?
I was worried the first go round of writing this, and I started writing this book in 2011, and it went on submission to editors in 2015. I was worried at that time about writing a Latina character. I had never seen a Latina character like Mona, who is upper middle class, entitled, spoiled. You know, she's not like the daughter of immigrants. Her struggle is not about identity politics or anything like that. And I, quite frankly, just did not see a way where publishers would believe that this was a Mexican character.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that it was correct, but I knew that publishers were going to have trouble with it. And even still, when the book went out on submission, no editors ended up picking it up. And because they said they didn't know how to market it. And was that a correct assumption I made back then? I don't know. I have certainly seen a lot of stories come out over the years about different writers of color coming up against gatekeepers who do not necessarily understand how to market books to communities of color. The Hate You Give, I remember reading in a New York Times article that book was passed on by an editor at a press because they already had a book by a Black author. And like, I read stuff like that and I'm like, was I correct? Was I wrong? I don't know. But as the years went on and as I realized, okay, this is actually happening, I actually am going to publish this book, it was really important to me to make it clear that she is bi-ethnic, that she is Mexican American, and that and a Latina, because I always wanted to see that character in literature, and I hadn't seen that character. And I know that what I wrote was true. It's true to my experience, and it's a big preoccupation of my life. Even when I don't want it to be a big preoccupation of my life. I've had my married name is James, and so some people know me as Elizabeth James. I've had people make racist comments about Mexican people to me, not knowing that my dad is from Mexico.
Wow. Yeah.
And this is something that I have to live all the time, even though I don't look Mexican, even though you wouldn't know that I am Mexican unless I told you, which is another like really awkward conversation that I've had to have. Like, and so, yeah, so it was really important for me to put it in there, but it took a long time to, I think, have the courage to do it and to believe that the world was ready to hear that particular experience in that story.
Thank you. And it sounds as if one thing that kind of complicated it maybe a little further is the fact that you're 50% Mexican versus 100% Mexican. I'm going to read a quote here. This was from when you were recently on NPR's Weekend Edition, and you were talking about this issue, and you said, quote, "It's taken me a long time to be able to stake out my own identity and say I'm Latina. This is who I know I am. That this is what's inside of me, and it's my right to be able to claim that. It's definitely something I still struggle with. I feel like, do I have the right to write Mexican characters?" So we are going through a period right now, sort of an awakening where we're really paying a lot more attention to, a white person writing a Black protagonist, for example, or a straight person writing a gay character, or straight actors playing gay characters or trans characters. So we have a very sort of present conversation along these lines right now. But it was interesting to me that this notion that, well, I'm only 50%, like, is that good enough? Or not necessarily good enough, but does that qualify me maybe to write Mexican characters? So can you talk a little bit more about just kind of that notion of, well, I am, but am I enough to actually speak on this community's behalf?
Yeah, that's a really tricky and difficult concept, because this goes back into my personal identity being bi-ethnic. I have spent 39 years feeling like I'm not really a part of the Mexican community just because I don't look Mexican and my Spanish is real shaky. But I definitely don't feel like I'm a part of the white community either. And so I have spent 39 years feeling like I'm not a part of anything and I don't belong anywhere. Well, then who do I write about? And my second book is about my dad's side of the family, my Mexican great grandfather. And I had to spend literally years giving myself permission to write about my own family because I didn't feel like I had the authority to speak about this stuff. And I finally, I had a conversation with a poet I met at Bread Loaf who is biracial. He's Black and white. And he showed me this like Bill of Rights of biracial and biethnic people. And I think one of the first ones was like, you have the right to say you are who you are, to identify any way that you want to identify. Nobody can challenge you. And I did need permission, as sad as that sounds. I needed somebody to say to me, it's okay. You can call yourself Latina. You can write about Mexican characters. You can say you're Mexican. You're not going to be brought before a tribunal of like Mexican people and and they're not going to say like, you're not Mexican enough.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a very deeply personal issue about which I'm still very conflicted. I'm still going through this. And that's probably why I write about it so much. I've written essays on this, and it's a big focus of this book. I'm still grappling with this, and I'm still going to be grappling with this, I think, for a really long time.
Yep. Thank you for that. So let's change gears a little bit, and let's talk about Mona is going through a lot. Like we've clearly established that she's going through a lot. But what we haven't talked about is she doesn't necessarily have the best coping mechanisms. So can you tell us about some of her coping mechanisms and just kind of how she's dealing with and not dealing necessarily very well with her circumstances?
Yeah, Mona is a cutter. She engages in self-harm, and that's not really a spoiler because it comes out in the first chapter. And that was actually the first thing that I knew about her when I had the idea for the book. Before I knew she was unemployed, before I knew anything, I knew that I wanted to write about cutting.
And why was that?
I don't know. This title popped into my head, Mona the Mutilator. And my husband very luckily talked me out of using that as a title for the book.
Uh-huh.
And
it's catchy. It definitely sticks.
It is catchy, and yeah. I think that's a different book, but I have a dark sense of humor, and I wanted to know if I could write a comedy about cutting. And so that was immediately where my interests were drawn, was to self-harm, and I did a lot of research about it. And I ended up reading several books on the subject, one of which was a book by Madeline Levine. She's a therapist from Marin County, California, and she studied this cohort of kids who were upper middle class, highly intelligent, incredibly accomplished kids who had all these problems. They had eating disorders, drinking problems, they were cutting, they were addicted to sex, they were like everything that you can think of that can go wrong with a teenager's life. And when she first started working with these kids, she was really surprised because they had every advantage. They were so good at everything. How could they possibly have all these problems?
Right. Their life should be perfect. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And what she found out was they had been so pushed as kids and so overscheduled that they literally had never had an opportunity to develop their executive function. They had never had the opportunity to decide for themselves, how am I going to spend my day? And then in a broader sense, what do I want to do? What do I like doing? Who am I? And then by the time they were like 16, 17, 18 and into college, they felt they had no self. They had never had the ability to develop a self, much less like coping mechanisms or anything like that for any kind of adversity. And cutting for a lot of them was a way to kind of break through this pervasive numbness that they felt and a way to make physical the existential and psychic pain that they felt. And reading that book had a really profound effect on me, and I really wanted to talk about that. And also, the second piece of it is female anger. I think that female anger is something that we're only just beginning to see in popular culture and in the media. And Mona is really angry, and this is just how she chooses to express it, for better or for worse. And I think that that's really important for people to understand, that women have been sitting on 10,000 years of rage, and a lot of us are just dying to let it out.
Right, right. So let's talk about one of the reasons she's unhappy and has some of this rage. I mean, this is a little more beyond that, but is the notion of what she thinks is going to make her happy, right? And she sort of qualifies that or characterizes that in a way that's really interesting to me, that I just wanted to touch on briefly. She says at one point she's on a date with this guy that she just met up with, didn't really know him that well in high school. I think it was high school. They end up on a date because they cross paths later on. She says, and they're just having a conversation, and she says, quote, "There's a reason music videos always show these guys throwing wads of cash up into the air. It's because that's how you know you've made it, when you've really reached the top in this country, when you can be outrageously and publicly careless. I actually think carelessness is what most people in America strive for. It's the terminal point of freedom." So I love that last line. I actually think carelessness is what most people in America strive for. It's the terminal point of freedom. So what does she mean by that?
I think that is and I think the next line is something like, that is a remarkably cynical take.
Yes.
I think that
it
is her remarkably cynical take on late stage capitalism and the way that we've seen every aspect of our culture corrupted by money and commoditizing everything. And I think that's my remarkably cynical take on it too. I don't really believe that, but I can see how a person could look at what is going on around us and arrive at that conclusion. And I do think that some people do live their lives that way, that they just strive for absolute carelessness.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that line. Thank you.
Thank you.
So what about the next, and this is just a little more philosophical. Why do we still think money makes us happy? When we all know, every movie, every book, that we have the moral of the story over and over and again is money doesn't make you happy. And yet we still think, so many of us still think money makes us happy. Why do you think we can't let go of that notion, even though, again, we're kind of told over and over, money doesn't make us happy, yet we can't let go of the idea that it does?
I think two things are going on there. For one thing, yeah, that's what movies and TV say, but that money is the only thing I think that we're told to value in so many different ways. Like look at who our last president was. He had nothing really going for him other than this illusion of money, the illusion of success. And I think that, I heard so many people, I heard friends of mine say, well, he was a successful businessman, think of what he could do for America. And of course, I'm screaming in my head, like, business and governance are not the same thing. Skills in business, even if he had skills in business, would not necessarily translate to good governance. I would actually say that the two are completely opposed to one another.
Never mind what you just said. It was an illusion. We're so willing to buy into the illusion, which is even almost more disconcerting.
Yes. So I think that money is kind of the only thing that we're told that matters. I think that people pay a lot of lip service to love, but I don't know. This is me getting really cynical, but I just think that from every aspect of life, we're just bombarded with this message that get money, get a lot of it. And then the other piece of that is that money does make you happy up to a point. And I remember reading a study, and this is outdated because this number is going to sound really low, but making $60,000, I think, was like the magic number, the inflection point. People who made less than that amount were stressed out and always struggling and had a really bad time of it. And people who made more than that, then you get onto that hedonic treadmill where you're like, oh, well, I have a Louis Vuitton, but I could have a Chanel, or I have a Bentley, but I could have a private jet. And I think, but what that shows though, is that, yeah, you do need money and you do need an amount of money that will make it such that you can pay your bills and not worry too much and not feel super deprived.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's hard because money does make you happy to a point.
Right. I mean, your basic needs have to be met. And especially if we're creating art, I mean, if we take it kind of to a specific, we can't create art if we don't have free time, right?
Exactly.
If we don't have, of course you do need a certain foundation of money. We've got to have our basic needs met, and hopefully have some leisure time as well to enjoy ourselves and pursue things that inspire us and make us happy. But yeah, what is that magic number? 60, 70, who knows? And of course it depends on where you live.
Yeah, of course.
But okay, so in spite of all the cynicism, in spite of the darkness, in spite of the cutting, in spite of all of the financial turmoil and her, everything that she's dealing with, the book is very funny, as I've touched on a couple times, and as you mentioned early on. So why humor? Why not just have it seriously grapple with the issues that you kind of wanted to tackle? Why infuse it with humor as well?
I don't know that was a conscious choice. I think that humor is just kind of the way that I speak. It's just what comes out when I sit down to write. I did try to write a funny novel about cutting, but I don't think that I spent any time actively like developing a comedic voice. Mona's voice, I think, is just the little angel and devil on your shoulder. I think she is just my devil voice. And yeah, it just kind of popped out. Now, I will say the benefit of writing humor, especially dark humor, is that you can approach really dark subjects and get very close to them in a way that isn't maudlin or overly wrought. I think if I had tried to write this book as a drama rather than a comedy, it would just be too much. I mean, this girl's dealing with unemployment, self-harm. She probably has a drinking problem. Her parents' marriage is falling apart. She gets in a fight with her best friend. The economy's in a shambles. Like, that's a lot. Like, who would want to read that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, but when it's funny, then you can talk about all of that. And there's been so many TV shows I've seen recently that have dealt with excruciating subjects but they're comedies.
Yep.
Fleabag comes to mind. Of course, as soon as I'm like, there are all these TV shows.
No, but I'm thinking of one with the non-binary. It takes place. Lisa Kudrow is the mom.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, there are, and they're doing it well.
Yeah, and I hope that this is where we get to as a society, where we can talk about these subjects that are kind of too hot to touch. Like Fleabag was all about grief of, losing your best friend. How could anybody get over that? But I think comedy allows us to process that. Comedians have been doing that for thousands of years.
Right.
And comedians can tell the truth too, in a way that other people can't.
That was the whole point of The Jester.
Yeah.
With the Jester, right? Yeah. Is there anything we can't joke about?
Oh, geez, you're not pulling me into that one. Sorry.
Okay. You have the right to opt out. Actually, this is your second opt out, but that's okay. Both times I put you on the spot. Okay, well, in that case, let me just go then to just a few of my favorite lines. So there's one line, and I don't know if everybody will think it's as funny as I do. And it's not even like I care about this person who's mentioned in the line, but for some reason, it's just brilliant. So I'm just going to read it. And some people think it's as funny as I do. And some people think, oh, well, give me another one. Anyway, okay, hold on. And this is after having read it 10 times. So that tells you, because that's how I know when I write humor, especially if it's my humor, if I read it like the third time and I'm still laughing at my own self, then I think that's a pretty good sign. So the fact that I'm still laughing is a very good sign. Anyway.
That's great.
Dave Matthews is what would happen if beer pong became a person. Okay, I think that is so dead on. No offense, Dave Matthews. Hopefully he's got a sense of humor, but I absolutely love that line. Okay.
Thank you. I actually love Dave Matthews also. I have a couple of his albums, but Mona said that. I didn't say that.
That's right. Mona said that. Yeah. You just had to put the pen to paper, but yeah, you were channeling Mona. It had nothing to do with your feelings because you own a couple of his albums.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Dave Matthews' concert?
No. When the opportunity for that would have come about, I had like $5 to my name. So no.
Okay. All right. I was just checking the level of your love for Dave
Matthews. No, I'm not there, but
okay.
I love Under the Table and Dreaming. That's a good album.
Hey, okay. Another thing that happens, and this is a teeny bit of a spoiler, but only a teeny. I'm not going to give the whole thing, but I'm just going to, and if you feel horrible that I shouldn't share this, then we can edit it out, even though I don't usually edit. But anyway, Mona starts to have sex with someone who I'm not going to identify. That's my protecting the spoiler. And she realizes kind of midway through, you know what? Maybe I don't actually want to have sex with this person. So she starts to hum the Star Spangled Banner, which is funny in and of itself. But then, quote, instead of pulling back and asking me why I'm suddenly patriotic, he hums along. So I laughed out loud at that one. I absolutely loved that. And I think he was a Republican. So I think that maybe kind of explained part of why he maybe just went along with it, just feeling really patriotic. But
oh, that's funny. I'd never thought of that.
I think, wasn't he? I think that
he
was
is,
part,
yeah.
Okay, and then the last one I'm just going to say again that I already mentioned earlier, but happiness and Mona go together like snails and salt. I absolutely love that line. Okay, last question about humor. How do you strike the balance between the gravity and the humor?
It's difficult for sure. And for me, it's not striking the balance between gravity and humor, I think, is not as difficult. What's harder for me is not getting too angry. I think that there's a fine line between joke and rant. And I want to go on rants when I need to write a joke. And that's where I struggle more. Yep. And a lot of the early drafts of this book were full of rants, and multiple early readers, literally every early reader was like, you got to bring this so far down.
Yeah.
And
we admire your passion, but it's off-putting. It's kind of distracting. Yeah. I recently read a book along those lines where it's like, look, I share your feelings on this matter that was being discussed, but yeah, it was a little too much. And then that can kind of take away from the story. So, yeah. Right, well, let's talk about how you actually got to the point of writing after you left Avon behind and after you left the pasta place where you were singing opera behind. Because as I was preparing for today, I saw that you don't have an MFA. You took, I think, 2 writing classes when you were in college. So at that point in your life, when you were getting your education, you weren't, writing wasn't at the forefront of your interests and pursuits and something you thought you were going to do. So how did you later on realize, actually, I do want to take up writing. I do want to pursue this.
Writing was something that I had always flirted with, but I'd never had the courage to go after it. And I never had the opportunity or the time either to go after it. I thought that I wanted to be a screenplay writer, actually. I studied art history in undergrad, and I would space out during my lectures and think up these stories about the paintings, like Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. I'm absolutely obsessed with that painting. There are 10,000 movies you could write about that painting alone. It's crazy. And that was a lot more fun for me during lectures than like listening to, the well, this flower symbolizes blah, blah, blah. And it was painted in whatever year. Um, and I that's why I got B's. But anyway, so I really wanted to do screenplay writing, and I started a few screenplays. I took one screenplay writing class at Syracuse where I went to undergrad, and I started a few movies and I just couldn't do it. I would get stuck. I had no way to push through it. I'd get 20, 30 pages in, run out of steam. And so when I found myself taking care of my daughter and I had this idea for this book, I think that I don't remember ever imagining that it would be a screenplay. I think I knew early on that it would be a book, but I also had the thought, screenwriting is way too hard. I'll do something easy and write a novel. And of course, haha, the joke is on me. It's not easy at all. And here I am 10 years later. But yeah, it came from wanting to write movies, and I still want to write movies. It's definitely something that I will do at some point when the opportunity arises.
Right. And so once you shifted, how did you make that shift then from screenplays to the novel? Did you just kind of jump in and figure it out as you went along, or did you do any sort of formal training to kind of make that shift?
I didn't have the opportunity to take classes because, like I said, I was at home with a baby. So I read Stephen King's On Writing, and I had a copy already of Robert McKee's Story, which is actually a screenwriting book, but it's amazing for figuring out scene construction and stuff like that. And I just read voraciously. I read Cavalier and Clay. I read some things that meant the world to me by Josh Moore. I read Mary Gateskill. I read and read and read and read and read. And I tried to pick apart what was working about these novels. I took a one-day class at the Writer's Grotto in San Francisco with Janice Cook Newman, and she focused on a fabulous book called On Subtext by Charles Baxter, which is maybe the best writing book I've ever read. I would not recommend it, though, until you are finished with the first draft. That is a second draft book. If you start trying to put subtext in the first draft, I think it's going to come out all crazy.
Yep.
And that helped. I took an online class with Jim Gavin. This is maybe 2013. So I had a full draft by then and was just trying to figure out how to turn this word vomit into a novel. And Jim Gavin is a fabulous writer and a fabulous teacher. He did a short story collection called Middlemen. And then he had us working out of a book called, I think it's called The Art and Craft of Story Writing by Oakley Hall. And supposedly he taught Amy Tan and Michael Chabon and some of these other people.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, it was it was a lot of butt and chair time too. Just every day, relentlessly plodding away.
And you had your butt in the chair while you had a newborn daughter. So how did you balance those two things? Because that's huge, right? Most of us, even if we don't have a newborn, I mean, it's hard to find the time and the space and make the time and the space. So how did you pull that off?
The first year, I would literally sometimes type with one hand while she was sleeping on my shoulder. I needed this so badly. I needed to have something else. And that's, of course, not to say that motherhood isn't enough. That isn't any kind of comment on what other people are doing and what other people value. But for me, I had to have this. And so I did that. And babies take naps. So I was just really diligent about sitting down during her nap time. And I wouldn't check email. I wouldn't read Perez Hilton. I would just sit down and work every day. And I did that for years. And then I had my son. He was born in 2013. And so then I had two kids. And of course, that pushes everything back. It's like going back in time. You've just figured out how to deal with a toddler, and then you bring a new baby in and you're like, oh my God. And then eventually they got old enough to go to preschool, and God bless those preschool teachers.
Right. The last sort of question related to writing is, I mentioned in the beginning of this kind of part of our talk that, you didn't get an MFA. I don't have an MFA. One thing, though, that I sometimes regret about, whether maybe I should have got one or it would have been beneficial to get one is less about the education, even though, of course, that would be fantastic. But it's more about the connections that you make in MFA programs. And so I didn't have that. You didn't have that. And yet you have obviously really kind of found your place in the literary world and made a mark for yourself in the literary world. And so I'm curious, given that you didn't start out with those connections, particularly for writers who are trying to find their way into this literary world, how did you do it? And kind of what would you recommend to them to kind of make their mark and find their way?
I completely agree with you that lack of connections is a real downside of not getting an MFA. And I have felt that over and over throughout the years. Those networks are really strong. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have that, there are a number of different ways to kind of find your tribe. I joined a long time ago the Berkeley Writers Group, which I found on Meetup, which I don't even know if Meetup still exists, but they were a very early critique group for me. And then I found some people through them, and we kind of splintered off and had our own thing. So I did that for a while. Then I went to Lit Camp, which was completely life-changing for people in the Bay Area. Lit Camp is founded by Janice Cook Newman. It's a juried writers conference for only 40 people, and you spend 4 days with incredible writers in very close proximity. I spent 4 days hanging out with Paul Harding and Adam Johnson and Isaac Fitzgerald and Josh Moore and just amazing people. And I spent time for the first time in my life with other really serious and talented writers. And about 3 months after that, I was invited to do a reading in San Francisco, and that led to more readings, and that led to meeting other San Francisco and Bay Area writers. I formed a new writers group with people that I met at Lit Camp, and we're still in a writers group now. This is now, 5 or 6 years on. And yeah, getting out of the house and meeting people is really important. And then also social media. I have a number of friends that I've never met, but we know each other from social media, other published writers. And that's a powerful connection as well, and not one to be overlooked. And that comes from showing up, interacting with people, supporting other people's books, and all of that. But yeah, it's a lot of work. It is a tremendous amount of work to find those people and to make yourself a part of that community. But it can be done.
Yep. And it sounds like it can be done, but it also takes time. Although, and because I just did a episode, 3 episodes ago about community and the importance of community and how to build community. And and this was with Ryan Sloan and Lori Ann Doyle, who is a member of the Grotto. And we were talking about just that notion that, for me, it was when I went to a conference at Book Passage, that was the one action, like your Lit Camp gesture, that then doors just started to open. And it wasn't even necessarily people I met at the conference, but even people then that became, 1 or 2 people removed. But it was just that one action, just doing something to get the ball rolling. And then other doors do open. And then slowly but surely, and like everything else, though, it takes time. But thanks for sharing that. And hopefully that will help some other people kind of figure it out, because lots of good suggestions there. So last thing I want to talk about in the interest of time is because I think this is something else, obviously, that's also going to be of interest to writers who have a book and they're starting to think about the submission process. Can you just tell us a little bit about, well, first off, how long did you say it took from inception to publication? And then maybe tell us about the submission process itself.
Yeah, it took me 10 years from inception to publication. And I started writing in 2011, and I finished what I thought was the final draft in 2015. I sent it out to agents. I got an agent right away, which never happens. And I was super excited. I signed with her and we went on submission, and she sent the manuscript out to, like I mentioned, 40 to 45 editors, and everybody passed. And in 2016, she sent me a letter that was like, I love you, but I just can't send this out anymore. I'm so sorry.
Right. So how did you deal with that? Because that's not.
I was devastated.
Painful.
Yeah. It was awful. And I threw myself a big pity party. I got drunk. I ate a bunch of candy. And then I showed up again I think I found out on Friday, and I showed up again on, Monday, or maybe it was a couple Mondays later. I don't remember, but I sat down at my desk and I was like, I'm just going to keep writing. I still believe in myself. And this was after I'd gotten into Lit Camp too. That was the other thing, is I was like, I got into this writers conference that's competitive.
The validation.
Clearly I have talent. I got an agent, I got so close. And I love this quote from Ross Perot, of all people, but I always think about it. He has this great line about how most people quit when they're like 1 yard from the goal line and they just don't know it. And I didn't want that to be me. And so, and also the feedback I'd gotten from editors who passed on Mona, they were like, well, let us know when she has another book. And so I started writing another book. Interesting.
Yeah. They passed, but they saw enough. They're like, okay, well, we don't necessarily want, but we know we want something from her. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I put Mona in a drawer and I started writing my second book. And I just focused on that for years. And I would send Mona out every now and again. If I would see an announcement for a contest, or a small press was having an open submission period. And I did that, and not expecting anything. And then in 2019, like you mentioned at the top of the show, I submitted it to the SFWP Literary Awards. Again, I was thinking if I got an honorable mention or something, that would be cool. And to my complete shock, I was named a finalist, and they offered me a publication, a contract for publication. And I had given up on the book. I was like, well, this is my failure book. Like I just didn't expect it. And I had to talk myself back into working on it, because I had moved on emotionally and in every other way. I had completely moved on. And it was like getting back into a relationship that you walked away from.
Right.
So, but I did eventually get back into it. They paired me with a fantastic editor, and now almost 2 years later, it's finally out in the world. But the moral of that story is don't give up. And I'm also really thankful for having had the opportunity to fail, because the worst thing that can happen when you're writing a book is that you finish it and it goes out and nobody wants to publish it. Well, that happened to me, and I was still able to move on. The sun still came up, I still wrote another book, and icing on the cake, eventually, things came around and I was able to publish that first book.
Right.
But it's a long process. The road is never straight, and you just have to believe in yourself, as trite as that sounds, and not give up.
Yeah. And I just think these stories are so, thank you for sharing your story, because I think they're so important, again, and I said something similar to this when I was talking with Lily, because her book took 10 years and she went through, we talked about, she got a contract and then backed out of her contract, her first one, realizing it wasn't the right contract, and just how hard that was. And, but I think these stories are really important, because especially for new writers who haven't even gotten to that point necessarily, and it's so easy for me, for example, and others, no doubt, to, I see Mona at the Sea, it's everywhere right now, and just kind of assume, well, she's connected and God, I'll never get there. And she must have had it, not that you must have had it easy, but it's just like, you're there. Right. Mm-hmm. And so getting the backstory and realizing, well, that didn't just happen. This person worked 10 years and got 40 rejections and got dropped by their first agent. And I think it's just really helpful for us as writers to understand. And it helps us hopefully to not get discouraged. Like you said, to continue believing in ourselves, continue, trying to get the books out there, moving on to the next book if the first one isn't embraced. So anyway, like I said, thanks for sharing that. The last thing that I want to ask you about is, you did just mention, and we talked about it a couple of times, Santa Fe Writers Project, but the fact that you ended up at a small press. So can you tell me just a little bit about some of the advantages of working with the smaller press versus maybe trying to get a deal with one of the big five, and kind of how that ended up being a good fit and why it might be a good fit for other writers as well?
Yeah, small presses can take chances on books that are maybe not the best fit for the mainstream. Mainstream publishers, I think, are a little bit, they're just more hesitant, I think, to take risks on certain kinds of books. And so small presses just have that flexibility. And I don't want to get into like art versus business, because I know that major publishers are also committed to art. So I don't think it's that, but I just think that there's just a little bit more latitude that small presses have with the titles that they can acquire. Accessibility is a huge piece of working with a small press, and especially my particular small press. I can text my publisher and ask him a question. I wouldn't say that that's the case for every small press, but it is for mine. And I have basically gotten like a master's degree in publishing over the last 2 years of working with them. I know way more than I care to know at this point about subrights and how publicity works and distribution and the importance of working with your book distributor and all kinds of stuff. And that's really valuable. I now know so much about the business end of things, how the sausage gets made. And that actually makes my job a little bit easier because now it's not like I just send the book off into this black box and I just expect the royalty checks to start coming. And it in a world that is so opaque and people don't exactly share details about how exactly things work, it is a huge benefit to be working with a press that is open and transparent about exactly what's going on. And so I've really appreciated that.
I love that. Yep. Makes sense. Elizabeth, we have come to the end of our time. There's lots more I would like to ask you, but instead I'm just going to say thank you again so much for being here today. Mona at Sea is out now. And where can people find out more about it?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram. I'm at unfemjames, UNEFEMMEJAMES. And my website is also elizabethgonzalezjames.com. And if you're in the Bay Area, Green Apple Books in San Francisco and East Bay Booksellers in Oakland have signed copies. So please shop local, shop indie. We love our local booksellers.
Awesome. Thanks again, Elizabeth. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. More about me at MatthewFelix.com. More about the San Francisco Writers Conference at sfwriters.org. And that includes the writing contest that's going on. You can get into an anthology this year, the virtual events that are going on, and now registration for 2022 is now open. And that, of course, that event will be in person. So please sign up for 2022. I think it's in February, the conference takes place. And again, more about that at sfwriters.org. Until next time, thanks for joining us.